This is SEO Theory Chat, September 25th, 2015. I'm Michael Martinez, and I'm chatting here with my friend Kent Yunk. We are going to try and do a weekly series of Google Hangouts, and we decided to use the SEO Theory channel to do that. So, hello, Kent.
Hello, Michael.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Beautiful sunny day. I think it's, just as sunny there as it is here. So the weather's cooperating.
It's actually not sunny here. We just had a massive storm blow through, and it's been damp all day. But
wow.
What can you do about that?
We're in a drought, so send some of that water this way.
I think it's going to probably dissipate over Texas or New Mexico someplace. It's unusual that the weather would go from east to west. Highly unusual. In fact, I don't remember the last time a storm has done that. So, if it gets to California, you're more than welcome to all that rain.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I would say that's global warming at work.
That is very strange behavior. So let's talk about SEO.
Let's talk about SEO. And you were telling me before I started recording or broadcasting that you were presenting at Share 15.
Yes, I did. I presented on Tuesday afternoon, right after lunch. I was the first of 3 panelists. It's tough when you're the first presenter right after lunch because everybody's digesting. So there were times when I got some laughs, and there were times when people just looked at me like, "Okay, what's next?" So I wasn't sure if that was post-lunch coma or they were actually paying attention. So yeah, it was good content. The presenters were good. I worked with 2 presenters, one from a company called Kroll, and they do analysis like, if you've got, you need investigative work or accounting forensics, things like that. They do investigative work that's specific to corporations. I think they'll actually do personal work too, but my guess is they're pretty pricey. So, and it was interesting because they were talking specifically about how they had optimized against asset searches. So what had happened was they were talking about, the presenter, Whitney, was talking about a instance where I guess Moldova had had a problem with some bad behavior within their central bank, and a whole bunch of money went missing. So they got brought in to find where that money went. And so that was a very lucrative contract for them because it was very time sensitive, and obviously it was a big company or a big bank and big organization, i.e. the country of Moldova. So it was interesting.
Did they find the money?
They found where the money, who took the money. The money did get taken, but she did not divulge, any greater details beyond that. But there was some malfeasance within the government in terms of how that money was being handled. So they were able to siphon that out. And she didn't actually say this, but my guess is that when you do that type of work, the follow-on is obviously to recommend how to prevent it from happening again. So anyway, so based on that, they wanted to optimize across a set of content and begin to perform better for things like asset searches. So it was interesting how she talked through the use of the various tools and how those tools were put together in a way that allowed them to know what content to optimize, where to place the keywords, where the opportunities were for inbound linking, things of that sort. It was very interesting. Good presenter.
So what do they consider to be an asset if they're trying to find somebody who's stolen millions of Moldovan whatevers?
Well, usually when you do asset searches and private investigators, I have a small local private investigator I've done some work for as well. It's usually because there is a division of assets, right? So in the case of a divorce, right, there are a number of cases where whoever the breadwinner is, the primary asset holder, they will sometimes go in, sometimes a small amount of effort and then sometimes a big amount of effort to hide some amount of those assets, cars, money, stocks, some kind of asset that would be part of a divorce where it'd have to be divided, right? So those asset searches. So a good example would be, if somebody has, 5 or 10 different bank accounts with different banks and different financial institutions, making sure that you track and consolidate all of those so that they can all be part of an estate or an asset division.
Okay, so they're not actually putting bank account information online.
No, they're not doing that, but they are tracking. Good news, bad news about this is usually when you're doing asset searches, the courts are involved, and so sometimes finding those requires that you get subpoenas, bank subpoenas, to go to all of what they think to be relevant banks, because banks not going to give you the information if you just walk up and say, hey, this is who I am and I need this information. They have to have a subpoena by the courts in order for the bank to actually even search to see if that person's in their database. So that's the range of responsibility really is, you can't actually do that unless you've got pretty good reason and you've got court support. So in that respect, I think it's very secure. They aren't sharing that information. But there was an interesting instance where I just heard this recently. There was a instance where a person who was a FBI informant, their cell phone was part of court records, and those court records were public. And so the people that he was doing the undercover work did a search for his phone number, and it showed up as a record in a public document specifically saying that it was an FBI informant phone number. So where those bank records are handled and what happens when they actually get into the court system, that I can't answer, because my guess is that how they redact or black out those things before they're scanned into some kind of public database needs to be looked at pretty carefully, because FBI shot themselves in the foot in that case. Michael?
Oh, definitely. Okay. I think in last week's newsletter, I mentioned that some security researchers found that like 40 to 60% of secure databases are leaking. No, that's not what it was. It was of the secure databases that are accessible to the internet. 40 to 60% of the information can be recovered, even though it's encrypted. So banks and government organizations that encrypt their data, if they get hacked, hackers can probably recover about half of what the information is, even though they're using encryption. Which has nothing to do with what you just said, but I'm trying to think of stuff off top.
Well, I think I think that's a really good point, because you're making the point about the fact that what we give to people in terms of our back-end data, we assume that even though they say it's double, triple, 128, 264, whatever the encryption level is, we make the assumption that they're actually doing that because they say they are. But the point you're making now is that even when they do all the right things, they're still not secure enough. And my guess is that depending on the technology that's involved, will depend on how sophisticated hacker is that accesses it, right? low level of sophistication, they might be able to get 5%. High level of sophistication might mean that they get 60, right? So
Yeah.
depends. I guess it depends on what kind of tools and capabilities they have in order for them to actually access that. But I think that's the point you were making, is just, how secure is the information, regardless of where it resides.
Yeah, it's not very secure. So like when Google was upset about being exposed by the Edward Snowden scandal, as one of the companies whose data the NSA was taking with or without Google's permission, they developed their own encrypted channels, so between their data centers, which presumably the various governments could tap into these encrypted lines, but all they're going to see is gibberish.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe it's not all going to be gibberish after all. So it's very interesting, because a lot of people are now trying to lock down databases in the wake of, say, the Ashley Madison scandal. And you still have to make this data somehow accessible to the internet. I've always been surprised that so many companies leave their email on web-facing servers. Okay, email, unless you are serving email to people who are connecting over the web, which a lot of companies do via VPN. There is no reason to leave your email on your server. I download all my email off my server and I delete it. Even if my server gets hacked, there's very little email anybody could ever get off of at any time. Most of it would probably be spam that hasn't been cleaned out yet. But a lot of companies that have been hacked, they leave their email on their servers rather than archive it offline. And so you have databases where people have to log in. That has to be web-facing, that you have to have the user account ID and the passwords and things like that. And of course, they recommend that all be encrypted and salted. And salting is where you just add some characters to the end of the passwords or whatever, so that it's harder for the hackers to figure out what they are. But there are actually ways that you can do a two-stage retrieval. And the reason why companies don't do that, well, one is probably lack of expertise, but two is it slows down the processing. It can add seconds to every transaction, which if you're logged into a secure website, you're already adding time to every transaction. So it's a big conundrum for everybody. Locking down that data that companies will have legitimate reason to go out and look for, and other people will have illegitimate reasons to go out and look for. And then you got all the hackers who are just spraying the data across the internet for anybody who wants it, which is, it's kind of funny. Most people are not aware, but in the U.S., I don't know about Moldova, but in the U.S., law enforcement agencies are not allowed to look at hacked data that's been released to the web without certain authorization, because they don't know if they're looking at someone's private information. So while everybody else is peeking at these hacked databases, law enforcement agencies have to be careful about how they do that. So it's a lot of stuff. What did you present at Share?
Well, it really was a session on really mapping the value of content. So I had put together I put together a slide deck that talked about how to calculate opportunity for a given piece of content based on keyword demand and competitive data. And I was told not to use that because it was a little more technical than they thought the audience would need. So instead, I did a more high-level discussion about, look, if you're going to create a content strategy and you're going to measure the value of that content, what process might you go through? And so I talked through the, in a world where we're all competing for eyeballs, what are the conditions that need to happen for you to be able to do a good job? And so you have to look at resource availability, time, budget, capability, I didn't go into great detail about things like platform because they told me to stay more high level. But then looking at, how do you calculate the um, the available, internal resources availability. So I showed a couple of different examples of um, how much pie charts about how much time people have to execute depending on what their title is. So an associate or a worker bee, so to speak, would have a lot more, 45 to 60% of their time is spent executing. Whereas if in the case of a manager or even an executive, that number goes way down, right? They get to execute far less, but they have to spend more time in meetings and more time developing plans and strategies and more time reporting as opposed to actually doing real work, right? And that may not be their focus, right? Their focus may not be to actually do the roll up your sleeves component. So, so I showed a couple slides on that and showed some slides on things to consider, the types of content, how those things map to one another so that you can build a cohesive strategy. And then, of course, I showed a really interesting slide from a friend of mine that I worked with at IBM. Hang on just a second. I've got a leaf blower.
I will mute you. So while Kent has a leaf blower hanging on around his window, I'll sit here and share a little anecdote with y'all. About 20 years ago, I was working for a software firm that had a large customer base of computer application developers who were developing in the character interface world, 24 by 80 cone screens. And we came out with software that transformed, helped people move into the GUI, the graphical user interface world. They took me on a roadshow to demonstrate the technical aspects of this new software, and my boss demonstrated the high-level executive stuff. We went to Chicago in this roadshow, and we did 2 days worth of presentations. The first day, over 90% of the people in the audience were programmers. And so when my boss was doing his part of the presentation, which was basically the value proposition, everybody in the audience was snoozing. When I got up there and started sharing code and all this stuff, they all got excited, and they offered to buy me drinks at the bar that night. Well, the next day, the audience was like 80% accountants and vice presidents. And during my boss's presentation, they were excited and interested and leaning forward in their seats. And when I got to the technical presentation, they were getting up and walking out of the auditorium because they had absolutely no interest in what the programmers were saying. So the reason why I bring this up is, Kent, your presentation, they told you to tone it down. Sometimes in the newsletter, maybe on the blog, I think mostly in the newsletter, I'll raise a point about reporting, and you have to take the audience into consideration when you're doing reporting. I've had to write reports for a number of large corporations, and sometimes you have to put a snapshot in this big long report that somebody could just take out and put into a slideshow presentation for the boardroom. So you're going to write 15 pages worth of stuff that's going to be condensed down to like 3 slides. Sounds like that's what happened to you at Sheriff 15.
Oh yeah. And the good news though was what it did was it did a good job of teeing up the 2 presenters that came after me, where I talked in sort of broad brushstrokes about what needs to be in place and how to approach it and ways that you could possibly report to executives based on what the results of the event of the campaign was, whereas the 2 follow-on presenters did things where they talked very, very almost prescriptively about the type of campaign that they were involved in, the various tools that they used and combined the capabilities of so that they could actually execute that campaign, and then what the results were. So some of them, it was really good that I could do that, tee it up, and then they could go into their specific scenarios and talk about what happened and what the actual result was. So pretty interesting. Oh, are you muted?
I'm muted, yeah. We should probably see my chair squeaks. Okay, so we should probably tell the audience a little bit about what Share 15 is. Who puts on Share?
Well, Share is it's not exclusively SEO, but it's an conference that is put on by a company that provides an SEO reporting tool called BrightEdge. And BrightEdge very specifically focuses most of their effort on providing rank tracking and sort of SEO modeling and workflow software to predominantly larger companies, a lot of and to ad agencies. So somewhat to the ad agency world, and then to a lot of sort of large brands, both technology brands, consumer brands, e-commerce, etc. So they have a great span of customers in that space, and what they're able to do is show rank performance in organic search across a number of search engines, across a number of keywords, and across a number of pages. So their whole objective is to help you understand how your site is performing, your website is performing on a keyword and on a page basis, and to be able to tell you if there's something that can be improved to make that page perform better. And then, of course, if you want to use the modeling capability, it has modeling capability that allows you to tie traffic and rank performance to real revenue, so that you can actually see what the shifts are in terms of performance. If you start to perform better in ranking, what the net benefit is to the company in terms of tangible revenue. So pretty interesting capabilities. And so what they do is they have a user conference where they bring in guest speakers, but in many cases, what I think is happening is in many cases now their customer base and the talent within that customer base is able to come in and really show off, how they're both using their tool, but also using a combination of tools to really raise the level of performance marketing in a lot of these companies. And so pretty interesting scenarios in a number of cases. I didn't see, obviously I'm one person, so I wasn't able to get to all the tracks, but the ones that I did see, there was usually 3 speakers, each speaking for about 18 minutes, and then some Q&A afterwards. And what I found for the most part was, even if one of those speakers wasn't good, usually 2 of them were particularly good with really valuable information. So, it was a good conference.
Yeah. I got to attend a Share a few years ago when you and I were still working at Quinn Street. Where I think you went with me, or I went with you. I don't remember. At the time, I was impressed with the quality of the companies that they had. Mm-hmm. BrightEdge. I think a lot of people have heard of BrightEdge, but they don't really know, who they're servicing. They're servicing the enterprise market. The average low budget SEO is not going to be able to use BrightEdge's services. It's too expensive, too much information for those kind of guys. But I was really impressed with the companies that were there, and I'm sure that it's even more impressive now.
Well, there was one presentation that I particularly liked, and that was Dave Lloyd from Adobe did a presentation, and he specifically said, I could talk about generic optimization, but I'm only going to talk about what we do when we're optimizing apps for rank performance inside of the Google Play Store and iTunes. So he really drilled down into a very specific area, what components, what tactics. So it was particularly good.
Yeah, niche search optimization is more important now than it ever has been before. And almost nobody in the core SEO industry really talks about optimizing for app stores and social media search. In today's SEO Theory newsletter, for example, I linked to a story that has some case studies about aggregators, people who are republishing other people's content on Facebook, and they are getting hundreds of millions of views. And to do that, Facebook is not really a search environment, but it's a social media environment where you want to be found. And I look at wanting to be found as on the same level as wanting to be found in a search engine, because you're creating visibility for your product or for your company or whatever. I optimize sometimes for Twitter search. A lot of people don't think about Twitter as an important search engine. It's actually the second busiest search engine on the internet, unless Facebook has replaced it. If you ask people today what's the second busiest search engine on the internet, they'll say YouTube. And all the statistics that I've seen disagree with that. Twitter actually gets more search than YouTube. Or last time I checked, Twitter was still getting more search than YouTube. Facebook's search button, or whatever you want to call it, it's powered by Bing, and it's very poorly designed. It just sucks. To be found in Facebook, you pretty much have to pay to be promoted, and then you'll go viral from that point. And that's where these companies are getting all these hundreds of millions of views and things like that. But niche search is becoming really important, because people who want to be found on smartphones are going to have to think about what semantic cues can they put on their websites or in their apps, so that Siri and Cortana and Google Now can surface that content for the user who's trying to interact with the smartphone. I think those technologies are still very primitive, but it can't all just be about the technology. I did mention in the Seen in the Wild section of today's newsletter a company that has rolled out a semantic search engine for television. They have a demo search tool called I'm going to say, what is my movie? Where they've indexed 40,000 movies, and you go in and you can ask them semantically phrased questions. You don't have to worry about keywords, like show me movies that have dogs in them, and it will come up with an accurate list of movies that have dogs in them. They say that they go in and they analyze the video, and they extract the words from it, and they do a true semantic search. It's a startup company that's it was launched by a university in Finland. I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's OULU, and it's that kind of a niche search. They say they're going up against Apple TV. I don't really know anything about Apple TV, but the scenario that they described in the press release was you're connecting to your television and to the internet through your television, and you tell your television, I want this, and your television will go out and find it. It doesn't have to be a movie, it doesn't have to be a TV show. It could be anything. And so that's going to be a form of niche search, just like Siri, Cortana, and Google Now are a form of niche search. And there will be people who have to optimize for that. Definitely. This video might be surfaced in that kind of a search market.
Right. And frankly, I mean, whatever that venue of content is, needs to be optimized. I don't think that you can rely on whatever the tool is that you're using for actually creating that content. You really have to think about how to tag and label that content so that it's searchable, that it can be found, and that it can be found for the relevant information that's contained within it. So absolutely. I completely agree.
Google Video Search actually does a better job of finding videos on YouTube than YouTube Search, and I've never understood that. I've always thought that, with all the resources Google has, they would want to put more resources into YouTube Search than into Video Search, or just make Video Search the YouTube Search tool. But apparently they're two separate indexes. And even today, I can still search for stuff on YouTube, not find it, and go over to Google Video and find it just like that. And so you're right. It's absolutely important that you get those cues set up right, because if you don't, you're relying on secondary information. Not everybody thinks to use Google Video Search instead of YouTube Search, which probably would be the second most used search engine if it were just one search tool instead of two.
Right.
So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I told Kent before we started this, I had intended to do an agenda. This is a first run. We're just trying to see how it goes. I don't even know if this thing's going to save to YouTube. I think it will. I've done a hangout once or twice before. Is there anything else that you want to bring up, Kent? Or?
I think I want to stay within a certain time period. So I think if we launch into too much, we're gonna spend a significant amount of time working on it. So
yeah, I do have an hour or two of video that Kent and I recorded a few years ago. I've never uploaded it. I promised him last week I would upload it this week, and of course it didn't happen. I've been struggling with my health a little bit, but I will try to get it up in the next week. If not in that week, then the week after. But I will definitely try to put it up. I don't know if it's going to be one video or multiple videos, but it will be raw footage. And Kent and I have scheduled a time every week, Friday, 4 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Pacific. And my partner Randy Ray may join us every couple of weeks, depending on his schedule. But this is primarily the Kent and Michael show. This was Kent's idea. We're just recording it on SEO Theory because I already have a YouTube channel. So, yeah, thanks for being there.
Yeah, thanks for organizing and setting up the recording. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays on YouTube.
I am too. So I'll go ahead and I'll click stop broadcast right now.